I So we've talked a lot about the professional aspect of orchestration, and I'm really glad because I think it's relevant to a lot of people. Now, I've had the good fortune to orchestrate a couple of short films just because I had the opportunity, but my interest in orchestration was always really just, I just got to do this. I just want to be able to write for the orchestra just because it's so freaking cool.
Yeah.
So here you, how do you take all these things we've been talking about? I think we've covered the question of bad orchestration versus good and good versus great very nicely. How do you apply those things to music that you wrote that's just concert music that there's nobody to support, there's nobody to back away from, it's just your stuff?
But the things that you do for yourself, you mean?
Yes.
Well, I mean, if you're doing it for yourself, you have limitless opportunities to experiment and figure things out. But the thing about it is to do it competently. So that's why I have things like my orchestration challenge, where people, well, I and whoever else wants to do it will get together and we'll all orchestrate the same work. And the way that I usually do this is that I will orchestrate my thing in advance, and then I will I will sit on it for months, and then I will announce the challenge, saying, "Here's the challenge, to orchestrate 12 bars of this work or 20 bars of that work." And if people are supporting me on Patreon, they can orchestrate longer and longer bits, and possibly even the entire piece up to 3 minutes. And then as soon as I've gotten all of the entries for the challenge, it's not a contest, it's a challenge, then I will close the challenge and I will release my orchestration, just to be completely fair, just so people know that I didn't copy their ideas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I will start releasing screen capture type videos where I've got a little mouse pointer with a circle around it, pointing out different things in their scores and saying, this is strong, this might not be as strong as you think it is, and why this works, why it doesn't. So it's always great to have attempts at orchestration that are very low risk. So you don't feel like you are just flying out there by the seat of your pants and not really knowing what you're doing and trying to get your work performed by an orchestra. So that's one thing, that you can do to prepare yourself for that moment when you are composing for your own personal satisfaction and you're putting your art into it and everything else. Another thing that you can do is, if you want to work in terms of like concert music, concert orchestra, is to have something of your own. I think I've got a video on this called "Getting Performed." It's number 9 in my Intro to Orchestration series. And the problem with orchestras is that they have a reputation to protect, right? They have had an audience that is 200 years old, right? They've developed this relationship with this audience for years and years and years, and they want to hold on to that relationship. And your music has to make sense with that relationship before they'll program it. So there has to be something about you that makes them want to perform you. And somebody just coming off of the street and saying, "Hey, I'm a genius." Like, well, people walk in here all the time saying they're a genius. Why are you a genius that our audience wants to hear? So the way that you get to that is you have something of your own, all right? Sometimes people will form like little composer groups where there will be 3 or 4 composers, and they will all work together with, say, a chamber group, and they'll have their performance at a chamber music series in a city. I used to do that with a composer group, and we had performances at Old First Church in San Francisco, which is just a haven for great chamber music. And doing that eventually gets you notice. One example was there was a group called Bay Brass. Bay Brass is composed of different sections of different orchestras around San Francisco Bay. So, for instance, they had like the heavy brass from they had the heavy brass from the East Bay, Oakland East Bay Orchestra, and extra guys from the opera orchestra. And then they had the horn section from San Francisco Symphony. So they were total heavyweights. And I wrote a piece for them. They commissioned our group to each write for different combinations. And there was this one combination nobody wanted, and that was Wagner tuba quartet and bass tuba. So a Wagner tuba is basically just a big horn. It's not really a tuba, but it has a big kind of blustery sound. And it's, if you've ever heard classical gas, there's like a big horn break in the middle of that. Those are Wagner tubas.
Okay.
So, and also like the opening to Deep Space Nine,
Mm-hmm.
there's like this big kind of belting low brass. Those are Wagner tubas.
Okay.
So I was just delighted with the opportunity. So I wrote this really fun work called "The Seven Deadly Sins of a Dog," and and I got, I got some feedback from these guys. So they're basically, if these are basically just big horns, it's going to be played by the horn section of San Francisco Symphony, which they're some of the greatest horn players in the world. So they got back to me and they said, look, Thomas, like, we really like this piece. We really want to perform it, and we're going to talk to somebody at San Francisco Symphony. We're going to try to get it performed in our chamber series there. But look, it's just like for this little gig that we're doing, that's like, we're all on our own time. We're not getting paid to rehearse or anything like that. It's just a lot of work. So can you write something a little shorter for us? And then we'll perform that in this series. And then we'll perform your other work at Davies Symphony Hall. Yes, I could do that. So suddenly I had a work performed at Davies Symphony Hall a year later. And so that's an example of how, like, having your own thing leads to, like, if the opportunity happens, boom, you could just move up to the next level. And, within a couple of years, I was having my stuff performed by orchestras all over the world. But that was the result of a bunch of different steps that were all sort of taking place at that same time of, I don't know if upward mobility is the right word, but just like orchestras finding out about me, wanting to play my stuff, me getting involved in what they're doing. Sometimes you can be a friend of a performer, and the performer can have something about them that makes an orchestra want to work with them. And you're an experienced orchestrator, and it all just kind of clicks together. And that's how I've composed several concertos for soloists that I knew who are working with different orchestras. And then, like my harp concerto, my erhu concerto for Chinese violin, those all sort of sprang out of commissions that happened because regional orchestras wanted to work with different soloists. And I was a composer who was known to everybody, and I was just part of the scene. So that is what I mean by having something of your own. That is how to get performed. That's how to work with orchestras. That's how to eventually get the gig of composing something original of your own, and not necessarily doing work kind of by the foot, right?
Well, my initial question, I think we've missed it just a touch, although everything you've said is awesome. There is a difference between a truly great orchestral piece and just an okay orchestral piece. And I think there's something to do, that there's something similar about, I'm hoping there's something similar about these techniques of getting out of the actor's way, getting out of the performer's way, and making sure, versus a situation where there may not be an actor or a performer, but maybe you're getting in your own way. What are the qualities of great orchestration for absolute music that make you stand out? Obviously, of course, you want to make sure it's playable. You want to make sure the orchestra people aren't saying, well, I can't even play this. You want to get past the basics. But what takes it to the level of, this is a great piece for the orchestra?
I would say that a good musical idea is the basis of any work. So you can orchestrate a tedious musical idea and you can make the orchestration sound fantastic, but at its core, it's still a tedious musical work. And that actually happens all the time. Like a lot of film music is just filler, right? So the orchestrator is just making it as exciting and as creative as possible. And I might be listening to a film score and saying, "Wow, that's some great orchestration," and it won't even occur to me that, or maybe it will if I think about it too much, that the musical content is not very strong.
Yeah.
So I think that the fundamental thing, like job number one, is writing something that is beautiful. So if you look at the selections that we have used for the past 4 years, if you just go to orchestrationonline.com and you go to our playlist of orchestration challenges, you'll see the piano works, the short piano works we've selected for the past 4 years, all have something just really indescribably beautiful about them. That's like, and also something that I feel that could move up to being orchestrated rather than just being played on the piano. So basis of having, and with those kinds of elements, like a lot of it, like having, like knowing about harmony, that like being able to work out the harmony for your piece in an intelligent way. A little bit of counterpoint that is useful, you know, more useful for some composers than others. Like for instance, Mussorgsky, who we orchestrated last year, was not really all that up on counterpoint, but enough to where the music has got its own life. The internal motion of the parts is interesting enough. Then of course before that we had Bartok, and wow, he just goes everywhere, you know. So that's part of it too. So the individual functions of the music are important. Then you have to think about what instrument is going to take what function in the orchestra. So the combination of those functions they develop a texture, which is the vertical aspect, right? We were looking at the score and we were seeing how like all of these things happen vertically. So function is horizontal. It's what's going on in time, over time. Texture is the vertical aspect. And then the third key aspect of great orchestration is balance, right? Will the parts balance? And sometimes it can be a little thing like, you know, if everybody is marked fortissimo in this one passage, will anybody be able to hear anything except for the brass? Right? Or it can just be like a very delicate balancing act where everybody has the same dynamic, but because they're all in their sweet spot, like they're all at in their most optimum, loudest particular register in their range, then the music just balances and so on. So there are endless discussions you can have about each one of these topics. I could write an entire book about texture. Henry Brandt wrote an entire book about textures. So texture, balance, and function, those are the things I would focus on. Like, is the texture interesting? Is it unique? Is it saying something about the music? The functions, those are the things that we talked about: harmony, counterpoint, the melody, all of these other things. The form of the piece, that's another one. That's the linear aspect. And sometimes the function can be just a question of composing an entire orchestral piece and then making out the individual parts for each musician, and then finding out that one musician only has like 6 bars in the entire piece. Right, so that's another part of the function, right? The linear aspect, or that you're asking the players to do something with no time, like change from one thing to another with almost no time. Like you've got the brass players putting mutes in and taking them out, and then putting a different mute in and taking it out, and so on. And there are no rests that you're giving them to just actually take the mute from the instrument, put it on the floor, and pick up the other one. Or a situation where you're asking a player to start on a very, very high note from nothing, and to sound in tune and to sound soft, right? So like, for instance, if you are able to play any note on any instrument, score any note on any instrument in Sibelius or some other notation application, and you are able to score something, that doesn't mean that the player is going to be able to play it, right? And that is one of the reasons why I've written some books. Like I've got 100 orchestration tips, 100 more orchestration tips, which I released earlier this year. And they talk about lots of little things, you know, that you wouldn't think would be a problem coming from a pianist perspective. I started off as a pianist, but when I was a kid, I also played guitar. And then when I was a teenager, I played orchestral string instruments and other weird instruments. And as you can see behind me, I've got some mandolins. This is a Russian bouzouki, but it's tuned as a mandocello, right? So it's got
Huh.
the same tuning as a cello, and then of course an old cheap acoustic guitar. So these are just things I like to sort of mess around on. But I can also, since the tuning of the mandolins are the mandolin family is the same as the violin family, with the mandocello, the mandola, which has the same tuning as the viola. And then right here, you can just see the bottom end of my little mandolin, which is the same tuning as a violin. I can actually try out different fingerings on them and make sure that some technical thing that I'm asking the violinist to play is possible, like playing certain two notes at once and then changing back and forth and moving up and down the neck and so on and so forth. So those are things that I'm able to do because of my experience with that and just having these resources. And also that's just fun to take this down and maybe play some Bach or something that is originally intended for cello. I can play it on my mandocello. So so that's part of like where my tips are coming from, just little bits and pieces of knowledge, ways of helping yourself, ways of getting around certain bugaboos. The main thing that you want to avoid in an orchestral reading session is raised hands, right? If somebody raises their hand and says, look, I can't play this, right? Or says like, do you mean XYZ or do you mean ABC? Because ABC sounds like this and XYZ sounds like that, right? And like you go, well, gee, I don't know. Well, let's try them both. Okay, well, you got, you know, if you assume that you have between 60 to 100 people sitting there in their chairs and they're each making between $75 to $100 an hour, guess how much money it costs just for somebody to raise their hand and ask you a question? Or being in a recording session and somebody's just, you know, like somebody isn't getting it right because the music isn't scored correctly, right, by the orchestrator. So anything that you do on that orchestral score is a decision, right? You are making thousands of decisions in an orchestral cue as an orchestrator. So it really relies on you to get it right the first time perfectly and then just move on to the next thing. To understand the intentions of the composer, or you're the composer, you should know. And this is true not just in film recording, as I'm talking about now, but also in concert rehearsals and performance, right? You really have got to get it all worked out before the rehearsal because you just don't want that waste of time. You know, even if it isn't a question of money from your end, it's a question of available time on the players, right? They can only be there, like usually these concerts, like say you know, if you are a developing composer, you are going to be lucky to work with a regional professional orchestra or semi-pro orchestra at first. So if you get, you know, they have got unions and they've got stipulations and they've got contracts and everything else that say how long they can play anything. And it's not like the conductor can just say, hey, you guys aren't doing anything for the next half an hour. We really need to work on this piece. Can you stay for longer? You know, it says, yeah, for time and a half, right? But then half the orchestra has got to go home because, you know, A, they've got kids, they got to pay the babysitter, or B, you know, they got to study for their real estate license or whatever, you know. They're saying if you're a community orchestra where people are doing other things. So you just cannot waste time. So that is why I feel like orchestration tips really save a lot of time. It's sort of like a message from the future you, right? To say, oh, geez, I shouldn't have done that. So how about if somebody from the future was saying, hey, don't do it, right? And I mean, you don't actually have to buy my books or anything. You just go to orchestrationonline.com and go to the, there's like a little category tab on the right-hand side. And I've got sort of brief versions of these tips just for free. You could find out about, you know, things like how to quickly change the parameters of glissando on a harp. So it just sounds more, you know, just by changing one or two pedals, you can make your glissando sound lighter, or you can find out about you know, about the pluses and minuses of working with higher auxiliary trumpets, like a D trumpet or a B flat trumpet, a piccolo B flat trumpet. So I talk about a lot of those different things, and of course, like what's interesting is how much of a mystery the strings are to a lot of composers, because often the school orchestra experience will be about band, right? So somebody might study piano and say, oh, I want to play with other people. Then they'll learn how to play saxophone or clarinet or something. So they'll have some of that experience coming to the Orchestration Online community, but they might not have as much experience with strings. So I'm finding a lot of string scoring that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense when I do these challenges. So so I've got a lot of tips on strings to help people get started with that, because it really is a different thing, right? It's the meanings of certain articulation marks mean different things when you are breathing into a pipe or when you are bowing across a string than they do just like hitting a key on a piano. I mean, I think of a piano as 88 instruments, each with individual triggers, right?
Yeah.
So you know, those individual instruments can't really do a whole lot. It's just like bing bong, right? You know, you're just like doing the different little notes, and just hopefully adding them all together to sound beautiful. But with wind instruments, it's just like that one voice that can go in any direction and any nuance and any subtlety, or just be incredibly loud and incredibly soft, or go down to a whisper to die out into nothing. So those are things that a keyboard player are usually not used to. And to be completely fair, somebody who did like 2 or 3 years of band might not really know about the orchestral aspect of an instrument that is also played in the orchestra, right? They might have taken a couple years of clarinet. They might not know anything about, say, niente, or, you know, or about like certain overtones that they could get, or, you know, or about subbing on saxophone or something else, or they might never have played bass clarinet, so they don't really know about that. So a lot of these things I try to remedy in the community, whether, you know, I've added a tip or whether I have got or I've got some educational material. A lot of what people call orchestration is really instrumentation, learning about what the instruments can do and can't do. And I mean, I talk so much about how the instruments are put together in orchestration challenges and in orchestration lessons and so on and so forth, lectures. I'm currently doing one on La Mer. Sometimes I feel like just the basic information about the instruments is not really being attended to. And that's why I've got some courses on Mac Pro Video. I'm currently doing a series on the different sections of the orchestra. The 101 course is for the string section. And then there is there are 3 courses covering the wind section because it's just so enormous. And I'm intending to do a few courses next year in the same vein on the brass section, and hopefully I'll get to percussion and keyboards and harp and so on down the line. But those courses, you know, I mean, I'm not really trying to sell anything here. If you just go to Mac Pro Video and you go to my courses, you can actually watch them. You know, I think you watch up to 5 videos a day, just watching samples. So those are really great ways to reference what the instruments can and can't do, right? And I also have a open course. The first term was released a few years ago, the Massive Open Online Orchestration Course, MOOC, spelled with an extra O. And that covers the basic instruments of the string section and studies each one. It's solo repertoire, it's repertoire duo with other instruments, working up to like string trio, piano quartet, then finally string quartet, which is another way to develop your ability to score for strings, is to write for chamber strings. And I'm planning to follow that up with a course that studies string orchestration just all by itself. And you know, you might think, well, string orchestration, that's kind of boring. Well, excuse me, but the winner of the last Oscar for best film score basically scored for strings. That was it, right? So it is something that can be incredibly subtle and fascinating and phantasmagorical, or it can just be really just straight and so on. So I'd like to do a a course about that, and then come back and, you know, to go along with these Mac Pro video courses, do other scores on basic orchestration that actually give people assignments in scoring. The first MOOC course invited the viewers to score different pieces, and on Patreon I evaluate those for people. So people can just take these courses themselves. You know, a lot of these resources are just free on the internet, and they can check them out and use them any way they like and get better on their own and have something of their own, right? And build towards that moment when they'll be able to play with an orchestra. From my own perspective, I mean, I sometimes get asked if I want to be called, Professor Goss or Dr. Goss. I actually tested to get out of high school in the 10th grade, and then I went directly into becoming a musician from there, and started gigging as soon as I could talk people into thinking that I was old enough to actually play in a bar. And by the time I was in my 20s, I was helping my mom pay her rent, with being in a band, working in a guitar factory, eventually moving from there to teaching, and so on and so forth. So I do not have a college degree. I just worked all this stuff out by myself, and I'm also a bit on the spectrum, a bit of an obsessive person, so that helps too in terms of like accumulating data. And yet I've had by this point, dozens and dozens, I'm just thinking might be up to 100 or more performances by orchestras across the world in different time zones. So it's just a matter of, where's your passion? Where's your focus for this? And mine is firmly on orchestrated music, whether it's composing it or orchestrating it or putting together opportunities for orchestras to build that repertoire of their own, or educating people so that our entire craft gets stronger, just, with people helping each other to get better. That's what the Orchestration Online community is all about. So if people have not heard about that, they can go to Facebook. The Orchestration Online community is right there. There's also a website, which has got all these resources that usually are for free. It's got links to different, to other websites and blogs that talk about specific things. Like I said, you can view some of my lessons on orchestration for free at Mac Pro Video, and read some of my tips and so on and so forth. And of course, the Orchestration Online channel has got hundreds of videos now we did I think we did the first annual orchestration challenge. I'd done a few before that were a little disorganized, but I finally said, I'll make this annual. So the first annual one, I think we had like maybe 40 scores, and I thought that was a lot. And then the next year, I think we got maybe close to 60 or something. And then last year it was 75. And this year, with everybody just locked at home because of COVID, I said, well, I'll move it from its usual time of July to August back to April or May. It was the month of May. And just invite everybody to participate and see how many we got. Well, we got 146 entries.
Wow.
So it took me 12 weeks to get through all those entries. And, I just had to there's a part of me that loves explaining things and loves lecturing and loves evaluating things, but it's it's sort of like Rachmaninoff, whose works that you showed. He liked to have a balance. Like sometimes he liked to conduct, sometimes he liked to play as a concert soloist, and sometimes he liked to compose. And he couldn't do all three. He couldn't juggle all those three of those things at the same time. And to be a pro in today's world, you kind of do have to juggle things and just like go from this thing and that thing and so on and so forth. But just the intensity of that many evaluations, it didn't really take the mickey out of me, but it sort of made me have to seriously set aside time exclusively for that. So now I'm working on something new. There's going to be a big announcement soon for an educational opportunity. There actually are two things that are coming up end of the summer, announced this fall possibly. So, people who are following me already in Orchestration Online, just keep your eyes out for that. And people who are new to it, just you'll just get lost in the resources that I've got. I've actually thought of writing a book or having a page on the website, like, start here kind of thing.
Right.
Just
it is fun to just kind of navigate. I have to admit, I'm overwhelmed because it's everything I've ever wanted in one place. So thank you.